You're watching Building the Franchise with the Jacksonville Jaguars, only on NBL Network.
Welcome back, guys, to another episode of Building the Franchise with the Jacksonville Jaguars. And just like we've done the past couple weeks, we're going to go ahead and go through some of the comments from the previous episode and talk about some of the things you guys were discussing in there. We had a couple people suggest that we put Myles Jack at middle linebacker and user him. First of all, my user skills are probably among the worst you've ever seen. Using him would not be beneficial for the defense at all. However, with that, putting Myles Jack at middle linebacker would require a position change, as just placing him there in the depth chart or changing his position on my own is against NBL rules. So at this time, we're not necessarily looking to put Myles Jack at middle linebacker. We're not looking to really make any position changes at this time. We're kind of going to just bring in some guys that fit the scheme that we're wanting to run. Also, we had a couple people asking about the injury settings. The injury settings are stock. Every slider in NBL is stock, so nothing has changed there. Yes, there are more injuries than previous Maddens, but of course, there are off-ball injuries now. It's going to happen. We, as a league, have tracked it throughout the majority of the season. The injuries in the NBL were less than the league, the actual NFL. So it's not necessarily as bad as it looks. I just had a very rough time with it this year compared to some of the other teams. We also had a couple people come in and offer some suggestions as far as for me to how to stop the run. I'll try it. I mean, at this point, that's all I got. I'll try it. It can't hurt, right? It's better than giving up 250 yards a game almost to running backs. So yeah, thanks to J-Rod for that, and AML, thanks for tuning into the first episode that you've seen of my series. Make sure, like I said, you're checking out the Lions. That's his name. Yes, make sure you're checking out Bombers series as well. Now, this episode, let's go ahead and get into it. This episode is going to be a little different. Spoiler alert, we did not win any more games. So we did end the season at 2-14. So what I'm going to do for this season, or this episode, is I'm going to go through and show you guys some of the highlights from the last couple weeks, from weeks 14 through 17, as well as touch on some of the stats throughout the season. Look at the season-ending stats and kind of how the team stacked up there there at the end of the year. So this is going to be the stats for the end of week 17. So this is all of season number 26, all the stats that the team had throughout the season. We're going to go over the majority of the players. We're not going to go over every single player that got one single tackle, but we'll go over the majority of the team and move toward the offseason as we get ready for this offseason for season 26. So for the first little bit of highlights that you've seen there while I was explaining how the episode worked, that was our 31-6 loss against the Seattle Seahawks. The offensive player of the game was Marquise Lee with 3 receptions and 46 yards, and the defensive player of the game was Telvin Smith with 1 tackle and 1 forced fumble. The first set of stats we're going to go over here is the quarterback position. We had Brandon Allen with a 50% completion and 1,213 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 20 interceptions. As you've seen from the majority of these past episodes, passing has not been our strong suit regardless of who's at quarterback. Colin Kaepernick, 44% completion, 826 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 21 interceptions. Kaepernick was also sacked 35 times despite being able to avoid pressure by getting out of the pocket. We also had Blake Bortles in for a time throughout this season. He had 61% completions, no touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. None of these guys were necessarily what we were looking for, obviously, as I stated in the last episode, so we will definitely be looking toward quarterback here in this upcoming offseason. Next up, we have our rushing stats for this season. As you know, Leonard Fournette was a injury-prone player throughout this entire season, so he is definitely not our number one rusher. The number one rusher on our team this year was Corey Grant, 125 attempts, 718 yards with a long of 73, and he also accounted for 7 touchdowns. The majority of our offensive scores this season came from Corey Grant, almost. Second, we had Mizell, who was the guy we picked up from, I believe it was the Chargers practice squad after Fournette went down early in the season. He had 29 attempts, 216 yards. He averaged 7.4 yards a carry. He is a faster back, and he had 2 touchdowns. We also had, of course, Leonard Fournette on there for the time he was able to play. He did get 32 carries for 194 yards, averaging 6.1 yards a carry, and he had 1 touchdown. And Chris Ivory, more or less as a third down back than anything, while Corey Grant was the leading rusher on the team there. He had 24 attempts for 70 yards, averaging only 2.9 yards, and he had 1 touchdown in short fielded situations. We did have 1 rushing touchdown by Brandon Allen. He ran one in. I believe it was on the last episode. The highlight was on there. Other than that, there was no other touchdowns from any other rusher, whether it be quarterback or a couple of other running backs that we tried. So once again, hopefully Fournette can stay healthy next year, and we'll see if we have a little bit better rushing success than we did this year. The last little series of highlights that you've seen was from our 28-37 loss to the Houston Texans in week 15, where we had Allen Hurns with 5 receptions, 146 yards, and 2 touchdowns for Offensive Player of the Game, and Calais Campbell with 3 tackles, 1 sack, and 1 forced fumble for the Defensive Player of the Game. For our receivers, obviously we had some guys with some low number of catches and situational play throughout the season, but we're going to go over the top 4. The top 4 receivers on the team, or players that had receiving stats on the team. Allen Robinson, 51 receptions, 899 yards. He dropped the ball 9 times. He had a long of 54 and 7 touchdowns, the vast majority of the receiving touchdowns for the Jaguars throughout this season. Allen Hurns, 40 receptions, 634 yards, 10 drops, a long of 81 yards, which came on a screen, and 3 touchdowns. Mercedes Lewis, the tight end, 22 receptions, 321 yards, 4 drops, a lot better than the receivers on the top 4 there, and along of 50 yards with 1 touchdown. And Marquise Lee, 17 receptions, 245 yards, 9 drops, the same as Allen Robinson. He only had a long of 29 yards and he had 1 touchdown. The only other players on the team that had a receiving touchdown was Michael Rivera, and Marquez Williams, the fullback. So again, drops were killer from our wide receivers this year, so we got to make sure we get them out on the field practicing catching out of that little machine, because they were having a rough time catching catching some passes they should have caught. They had a very rough time with that on some situations throughout this year. And lastly, we have our defensive stats, and every one of them had absolutely 0 runs stuffed. Whether that's on the stat board or not, I'm going to go ahead and let you know. Jalen Ramsey, 44 tackles, 3 forced fumbles, 8 interceptions, and returned 2 for touchdowns. Barry Church, 34 tackles, 1 sack, 2 forced fumbles, 4 interceptions, and a touchdown. Paul Posluszny, 33 tackles and 1 sack with 2 interceptions. Aaron Colvin, 32 tackles, 5 sacks, and 2 interceptions. Boye had 30 tackles and 3 interceptions. Telvin Smith, 29 tackles, 2 sacks, 3 forced fumbles, 2 interceptions, and a touchdown. And Tashawn Gibson, a player that was a lot better than I thought he was going to be originally. He had 28 tackles, 7 forced fumbles, 3 interceptions, and 3 touchdowns. So the defenders were able to take the ball away, but our inability to move the ball on offense, coupled with our inability to stop the run with that defense, made for a rough season. Like I said, we ended at 2-14, so we do have the number 1 pick. Most likely we're going quarterback, like I've stated before. There's plenty of quarterbacks in this draft coming out of college this year, so we're definitely going to look toward the quarterback position and try to shore up that for the future of the franchise. We, as I've stated before, may bring in another quarterback as well during free agency or throughout a trade, just to give our rookie a year to sit and just get used to the NBL and develop a little before we throw him out there behind that offensive line. So make sure you guys tune in for that next episode. The last set of stats that you guys, or highlights that you've seen, was from the Tennessee Titans game where we lost 6-38. Again, 2-14. Nothing but up for next season, though. Make sure you guys tune in next Tuesday, if not before then, depending on how the NBL schedule works as far as the off-season goes. Like I said, we're going to move toward a little bit different schedule as we move toward the off-season and try to get those in a little bit sooner. So make sure you guys tune in for those, and make sure, if you haven't already, subscribe to the NBL Network so you can see all things NBL.